So I have too many slides for this hour presentation. So I might have to go fast or go slow or do something. But so I teach a class on drones at the University of Denver, and I have like maybe 3,000 slides. So this is only 129 tonight. I'm going to figure out how this works. No? Sure. So what I want to talk about tonight is terminology, history, some issues such as autonomy, fixed wing versus quadcopters, and the applications in doing business with drones, such as the recent Perker announcement with the FAA. So terminology. Can you guys see clearly from there? So basically, here's the current definition of drones. This doesn't have a laser pointer. Unmanned aerial vehicles, UAS, they're all the same thing. And I'll go into a little history about drones. And then quadcopters or quad rotors. Even though it says 4 or more rotors, there's been 3 rotor quadcopters. Which doesn't make sense, right? So basically, this thing all started with target drones. So drones are unmanned aircraft flying automatically or remotely, such as a teleoperation. MAV is a small air vehicle, and remote control is what we do now for most RC people as well as the military. And RPV was an old term, started with the Navy, with submersibles. There was a nuclear bomb right off Spain that got lost, and it was asked by the Navy to go find it in the ocean. So that's where RPVs came in. And then UAVs, mostly aircrafts, and then waypoint navigation using GPS. So here's the difference between aircraft and model aircraft. So as you see here, model aircraft, there's basically no restrictions. It wasn't a problem before this, but now there is a problem. So one of the things my colleagues always ask me is, if you want to be a drone pilot, do you need to have a pilot's license? And what do you guys think? You kind of need the regulatory stuff, but all these young kids are just better at gaming than anybody else. So it's not clear to me that you need to be a pilot, but it's all about jobs and security and everything else. So if you talk to Jeff Forrest at Metro, he'll tell you he's hoping they're all graduates from Metro and have a degree in aircraft. But so if you look at what a UV pilot does, they have to be certified, there's a fitness thing, and they have to be instrument rated. Model aircraft, there's none of that. In fact, model aircraft is flying an unmanned vehicle in a designated park like at Chatfield up to 400 feet. And that was the old regulations. But now, with these current drones, they're flying everywhere. So here's basically the trio of vehicles: powered, ballistic, rockets, unmanned. And so this is what we're talking about tonight. And this is where you find the definition of drones. And I'll go into what is automatic and what is autonomous, because there's some big misconceptions about what is autonomous. So advantage of pilots, this is pretty straightforward. Make fast decisions, unknown environments, pattern recognition, so that's computer vision, making inference. So these are all of the AI kinds of technologies. But what does this mean? So if you're on board looking through the eyes of the aircraft, your only sensor is the cameras on board. There's some time latencies, there's some problems with the comm link. And so you can be spoofed, you can do a lot of things. So I bought a Yamaha RMAX. Are you guys familiar with the Yamaha helicopter? It has a 10-foot rotor, so it's about from here to the wall. I paid $150,000 for it, but that's governed by the missile treaty between the US and the rest of the countries, because you can carry a bomb over, it was like 300 feet or something, and an RMAX can carry 150 pounds, so that becomes a problem. You'll see an RMAX later, but my biggest fear with RMAX was we only had one helicopter. If we crashed, what are we going to do next? So with the quadcopters now, that's not as much of a problem. And then the other big issue is this see and avoid. Right now, most vehicles have no sensors for a collision avoidance. If you're flying an aircraft, it's your responsibility to avoid other objects. But with the quadcopter, it's kind of open. So manned aircraft, we're never going to replace manned aircraft, but we're getting close. A lot of missions. So here's the bottom line. In simulation between an aircraft and an unmanned vehicle, in a dogfight, unmanned vehicle always wins. And why is that?
You don't have to keep a guy alive.
No pilot means you're not limited to 10 Gs. So you can typically outmaneuver, outspeed, and do a lot of things around a manned aircraft. So, but this is only in simulations. It hasn't happened yet. So there's a lot of advantages to going unmanned. RPVs, late 50s. In fact, we flew a lot of unmanned aircraft over Vietnam during the war. But we was using the old film canisters. You'd fly over, come back, then look at the tape and see what you got. Now everything's digital, so everything's pretty much instantaneous. So the U-2, the Global Hawk. So the big fight right now in government is there's some money to do this mission, 70,000 feet. Do you fund the Global Hawk or do you fund the U-2? And if you look at the specs, they're comparable. But the issue here is you can fly the Global Hawk for 24 hours to 36 hours and stay in orbit. And the biggest problem with the man is he needs to use the bathroom and he needs to eat, and there's loads of other things that goes wrong with the man. So if you can get the man out of there, you could be better off. So let's see how it.
America, it could revolutionize intelligence gathering and save lives too.
An ungainly-looking aircraft called Global Hawk is high over the Pacific Ocean tonight on a non-stop 7,000-mile flight from Australia to Edwards Air Force Base in California. It's not just the distance that makes this a breakthrough in military technology. It's the fact that it's being flown without a pilot.
It has all the potential to transform the way we go about doing our reconnaissance, our intelligence surveillance missions.
Global Hawk is a spy plane, loaded with cameras and radars and piloted not by a human being, but by software.
So is this an airplane or a flying computer? It's a very good question, and commonly I refer to it as a flying computer.
Programmed to fly long-range reconnaissance missions, which for the last 40 years have been carried out by U-2 pilots flying in pressurized suits on the edge of space. Global Hawk can fly as high, but because it has no pilot, it costs about half as much as the U-2.
It doesn't need life support systems. That makes the airplane a lot cheaper, and it makes it able to stay there a lot longer.
But a flying computer is only as good as its software. When this Global Hawk picked up an errant signal telling it to self-destruct, its human handlers were helpless to pull it out of its death spiral. Flight spin from 65,000 feet gives new meaning to the term computer crash.
These are things that are reacting to the basis of how smart we are in programming them and teaching them how to survive.
Low-flying unmanned aircraft have already seen combat. In Kosovo, they helped track the Serb military. Serb gunners even shot some of them down. But there was no captured pilot to parade before cameras. Only a photo op with twisted metal.
We can put that aircraft at risk that we would not normally put at risk because of the man on board.
Flying at 65,000 feet, the $40 million Global Hawk could photograph all of Kosovo in less than a day.
We can stand off from Philadelphia and image an area the size of Manhattan and count the number of people there.
Say that again. You can orbit over Philadelphia and count the number.
You can orbit over Philadelphia and you can actually count the number of people in Manhattan.
Right now, Global Hawk is not scheduled to replace the U-2 for another 8 years. But the Pentagon has just asked Congress for an extra $25 million to cut that time in half. Pilots won't become obsolete anytime soon, but once Global Hawk starts flying real-world spy missions, they will have one less mission to perform. At the Pentagon, this is David Martin for Eye on America.
What was the date on that?
1999. No, 2009. 2009? Someplace in the 2000s somewhere. So the first unmanned air vehicle, going back to the Wright brothers. So no one can predict where it would end. And we seem to be right at the cusp right now between drones being commonplace. I don't know if you guys watched the news recently. Google just bought 8 robotic companies. Facebook bought a company. Oracle bought a company. Everybody's getting into the robotics unmanned area. Amazon has their package delivery system. So you can see from here, 1917, 1918, there's been a fairly decent history in the US. But if you look at that Fairy Queen right here, it crashed in 1932. So over the years, all the things they have been crashing a lot. It's only in the past 10 years that you've seen a lot of action in this area. First radar control plane, the German V1, Ryan Astronautics. So all these things started as targets for simulating aircraft, simulating defense systems, and from there it kind of moved forward with the next video. So the Firebeat, this is like I think this is the 1940s, 30s. And in the 60s, you started to see more of these things. But then you can see that the Lockheed D-12 accident at launch. What you see mostly in these early drones, there's crashes like every other year. And that was a problem. I used to work at Lockheed Martin, so we did the Dark Star. And it crashed because of a software glitch. It was 97. So we've been putting around with this thing forever. The Global Hawk started in 1995. But it's only now that we're getting to see a lot of interest in drones. And it's not the US's interest. The world is actually ahead of us in terms of drones. Last time I looked, there was 62 countries building drones around the world. Iraq, Iran, all the major players. China wants to be the leader in commercial drones. The Israelis are really big in this. So there's a lot of work here. So 1907, this seems like a long time ago. 1920, some early versions of a quadcopter. 57, this thing that looks like a Jeep. This is similar to the walking Jeep that they had out of the Army. So bottom line, name change, remotely piloted vehicles, 60s to 80s, 1990s, UAVs. Then we realized it's more of a system than just the platform itself. So beginning in 2005, UAS systems, and now 2010, drones, which stands for a lot of different things. So technology, 100 hertz, talk about radio waves. Tesla, turn of the century, did this first remote control RF teleautomaton, which was a submarine. So Peter Hewitt worked with the light bulb guy, Edison and Westinghouse, both of them. So Tesla coil, RF transmission, remote control. So this was his boat in the world sphere. Sperry, he did something called gyro stabilization. His son. So this is basically what we're talking about. A platform which is sensors and actuators and a computer interacting with its environment, and a controller or human with some displays and a controller. And what that really looks like is something like this. So that kind of gives you a feel of what we're talking about here. So this is the Sheridan model of MIT on what's happening. Far left, what you see is something you call it manual control. We call it teleoperation. And the far right is a fully autonomous architecture. The dark lines are solid control lines. The dotted lines are secondary control lines. Hopefully I'm not standing in your way. What's nice about this, what you see is the hardware hasn't changed at all. Once you add the computer to the vehicle, the only thing that's different is the software. And if you can look at shared control, supervisor control, same hardware, just different software. So in my experience, we do the far left a lot. So if you're going to buy a quadcopter, that's pretty straightforward, remote control. Far right, autonomous or automatic. Fairly easier to do than the two in the middle. So the problem we had was a slow transition between what's the human going to do and what's the computer going to do, and that's always been a problem. So where do you shake hands? How do you back one up versus the other? And then if you guys follow Moore's law, I wish I had a laser pointer, we're right there past the little lizard, heading towards that 100 million MIPS. So initially, and when I was doing this about 10 years ago, we were supposed to hit 100 million MIPS in about 2050. But at the rate we're going now, people are talking about singularity at 2020 or 2025. So do you guys understand what a singularity is? Most of you guys do. What it means is the computer will be smarter than the human brain, and at that point, life's going to change. And what that means, it's not clear yet. So when I was building, I did something called the autonomous land vehicle in the mid-'80s. If you look at the mid-'80s, we had almost no processing. So we had a vehicle about the size of half this room filled with things like butterfly and warp machines. And we programmed on Lisp. And now there's way more processing in that little laptop than we had in this whole truck. But the truck cost us $60 million. It's basically a moving lab for DARPA. And we were able to drive 12 miles an hour hands-free for a little while. Are you guys familiar with the automated highway? So I was on an automated highway program. And we drove a car from, when it's a we, my colleagues at Carnegie Mellon and I, from Washington, D.C. to San Diego, hands-free. And we drove 90% of the time hands-free. Would you guys get in a car that drives 90% of the time correctly? We had problems on bridges, we had problems with signs, we had problems with mixed traffic, but besides that, we were good. So in the middle of Nebraska, we're fine. It's only when you come into the cities we have a problem. And the problem with an autonomous ground vehicle was if you're a foot over on a tire, you could be off the road. So that's what was a major problem for us.
What year was that?
We demonstrated in 1997 in San Diego. So now you need to think, what's the role of the human and what's the role of the computer? Humans are good at a lot of things, but 40% of the accidents in aircraft is due to human error. So what you want to do is take the good stuff out of the human and not take his human error. So there's a guy in France named Verplanck that said, well, we know the ends, but what if we started sharing the load between the human and the computer, or as a backup to the computer, or the computer as a backup to the human, or some mismatch of things. And this is kind of the old human-machine robot interface problem. Human as backup is pretty good, but if you don't exercise enough, human not respond in a correct way. Human as a partner, how do you transition between what the computer is going to do and what you're going to do? In the old days, we had the computer talk to us to tell us what it's doing, so we knew what we had to do once the computer talked, and it's like 20 years ago. So decision making, you can do it with computers now. Communications, a little of an issue. Now, if you watch television, just about everything is robotics. So with increased technology, memory, processing speed, you can do a lot more. So basically right now, software lags hardware. So here's this guy, Tom Sheridan, again at MIT, talked about if the computer did everything or the man did everything, what could be some common steps for transitioning from one stage to another? So this is a 10-phase kind of thing. So if we talk about military drones, they're large. So this is the Global Hawk. It's bigger than a 737. And the Predator is the one you always hear about in Afghanistan and Iraq. Quadcopters, brand new, probably in the past 5 or 10 years. You're hearing more about this now than ever, from small to large, to one that's the size of a helicopter. Predator, Global Hawk up there, 60,000, 70,000 feet, and then all the way down to like a few hundred feet for like Dragon Eye. This kind of gives you a pictorial about, Global Hawk and a U-2 up there, Predator in the middle, and all these other UAVs for the Army. And there's 4 class ranges from large, medium, small to micro. And then you can't forget about winged or flapping wing UAVs. So it's more than just the platform itself. It's, it's ground stations, it's satellites, it's comm. There's a lot of stuff going on. In fact, for the stuff that's being flown in Iraq, the planes are launched remotely from a local airstrip in the Middle East. It's picked up by Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, and it's flown from Nevada on multiple shifts, and then it lands in its base. I did this calculation once. It wasn't bad. It's probably, it's not more than a second, but it's probably less than a second. Because I was doing this little spacecraft thing, and I had a few seconds to the moon. And so it's basically a digital network with a lot of stuff nowadays. So that's why it gets extremely complicated. So you see the UAV as one. And then the weak point in all this is software and the communications. So types of control, manager control, joystick, what you see right here, program or automatic, which is a state machine, waypoints, picking GPS points and then following a waypoint, supervisory or autonomous. So the problem becomes the bandwidth, how many pipes you have between your 2 comms from front of aircraft to the ground, what is your latency like you asked about, and what is the interface between aircraft and the controller. And then there's this, the issue here becomes what is in that software that you call supervisory. Here's myself, I did a contract on augmented reality. And I was using the AR toolkit to project a 3D virtual image of my vehicle. And I was talking to my vehicle with spoken words using a Carnegie Mellon language program. So what I was trying to do was plan out the mission for a drone just by talking to its virtual image and then transmitting that controls or that plan to the robot. So autonomous, automatic, it's always confusing. So automatic, you follow rules. And so you must know its states and you must know its rules. Autonomous is a little different. You look at options and you make a decision based on weighing different factors. And so everybody calls everything autonomous. And between the Army, Navy, NASA, they have different definitions. This is the technical definitions. So what you see on top there is a model of an automatic robot. So if you know the state, you know the rules, the behavior is pretty much set. So this is good if you know your environment. If you don't know your environment, that becomes a problem. Now if you look at the bottom one, the autonomous robot, something called values and there's something called memory. So when it's values is your weighing a criteria, but the memory part is your history of what you've done. So this implies there's some learning within something that's autonomous. The result is still the same. What you want to do is get people out of the loop because people cost money. So people are trying to get rid of people in the operations loop. So they both do the same thing. If you know everything that's going to happen for you, automatic is fine. If it's a complex environment like going through the woods, that you might need something that's more robust, which has learning, which has inference, which might have a computer vision, which might have a search algorithm. So this is all AI stuff that fits in autonomous. So when we go to space, you think, wow, this is going to be complicated. It's really not complicated because you know everything about the space and there's nothing up there. I mean, so you can really predict the environment, you know all the different states, that's pretty straightforward. Now, if you had to go through a wooded area, we did it with a ground vehicle, we were only able to navigate 1% of the time because of the variability and stuff. So drone issues, launch and recovery. This is for a fixed wing aircraft basically. Larger vehicle, larger payload. So if you look at the Global Hawk, it has that big nose, right? So what that is the big SAR antenna. So SAR looks down at the ground. And why is SAR good? SAR is synthetic aperture radar. It's good because you can see through the clouds, or you can see through bad weather. Everything else is EOIR, electro-optical infrared, which is cameras, or night cameras. But SAR is more capable. So a lot of surveillance aircraft uses SAR. So the bigger the aircraft, the bigger the sensor, the more you can do. And then communications is a problem. If communications is a problem, and if you can put on onboard autonomy and you don't have to talk to the ground, then you don't have as much of a communications problem. So you put all the parts on a vehicle, that can reduce some of these little hijacking kinds of stuff. So we need analysis in the economics. Does it really make sense? What are the regulatory stuff? What's the perception of drones? You know, like safety, security, especially privacy. It's big issues. And then what's the government doing about it? So let's talk a little bit about economics. It's always about economics. If your robot's too expensive, is anybody in the automation field doing robotic work cells? So you realize the robotic arm is like $60,000 for a robotic arm. And the payback may be a couple of years before you get your money back on those arms. So you can't really afford that. Plus, it's hard automation. It's not as flexible as what you would find here. So you can show that it's feasible and it's doable. So I had a job with Hammond Candies. I used to with Hammond. I was supposed to be putting candy canes in plastic wrappers with a robot arm, and that was a hard problem. We never got an answer to that. So let me talk a little bit about costs. So Global Hawk, $60 million. Predator, $30 million. But let me say for the Global Hawk cost, $20 million of the $57 million was the SAR sensor, the big antenna. Everything else is kind of reasonable for the military, but it's too expensive for everybody else here. Even Dragon Eye, which is a small little hand-thrown naval reconnaissance fixed-wing aircraft, is $120,000. So why quadcopters? I don't know if you guys ever watched YouTube, but there was a guy named, what's his name? He's a professor at UPenn. He's a personal friend of mine. He has like these 20 swarms of small little quadcopters flying around doing tricks. He tried to explain to me once, like years ago, like must have been 10 years ago, that the reason you do quadcopters is because it's simple and cheap. You have one motor on each corner, and you can fly. I mean, how cheap can you get, right? You're not going to pay $60 million or $120 million for, big programs. So reliable, compact, low maintenance, except the payload is fairly light, and the flight time is small based on the battery. And we'll get more into that. But there's some good applications for these kinds of quadcopters. So large for quadcopters, bigger than 4 kilograms, which is like, a few pounds, and it's still pretty small. So difficult to control, but if you can do it with MATLAB, you can get around some of that stuff. You can buy different rotors. So let's talk about how you design a quadcopter. So 4 rotors, opposite 2 are the same pitch, opposite 2, the diagonal 2 are the opposite pitch. Advantages. So when it says you don't require the mechanical linkage, on my Yamaha, we had this big little swash plate that you had to move up and down and stuff to change the pitch of the propellers. Now you don't have that, so now it's fairly straightforward, fairly simple. In fact, I have 2 student projects at University of Colorado playing with quadcopters right now. So again, opposite rotors, opposite direction, and then up and down. If the 4 forces are balancing gravity, then you're hovering. And then if you're tilting, you do the resultant vectors. And then for control, the fatter lines are there to show that you're a lot more than the opposite. So the fat arrows, a lot more higher velocity, small arrows, small velocity directions, black and white. Is that pretty straightforward? So you can see this all the time, I think. So everybody's using these Futaba radios and stuff to give you direct manual control of quadcopters. And some guys use the old Xbox controllers. Here's a little screenshot. So I'm going to head more into applications. So everybody in the world wants to be using drones, from Europe to Asia. So here's some typical military roles for drones. This is kind of drove the development effort. Now right here is what manned aircraft does. This is what cruise missiles are doing. This is kind of where UAVs are working right now. And then what they're developing next. And then future UAV. So there's a lot of upside to military drones. Now, in the civilian sector, there's just so many applications right now. And this is what man is doing right now. And what we hope to do is replace manned aircraft with some drones. So let's talk about applications. So the military uses it a lot for surveillance and taking out different people. But right now we're kind of moving more towards the civil commercial applications. So this is typical, relaying, sensors, inspection. So if you have a drone without a sensor, it doesn't do you any good. So you really need some kind of payload or some kind of sensor. So early military missions, it's mostly all cameras. Signal intelligence, SEED is suppression of enemy air defenses. So there's a lot of work being done in the military. But if you look at the commercial side, there's a ton of opportunities. I don't know if you guys here are trying to start your own company or what. Just about everything you can think about, you can use a drone for. The biggest one I've heard recently was if somebody's drowning, they'll drop some life preservers on you. In Europe, there's one with, what do you call it when you have to shock the guy when he has a heart attack? Yeah, so the drone itself is a defibrillator. So it's supposed to fly to you, land next to you, and the guy's supposed to just charge you up right there. And then there's all humanitarian stuff. In Africa, they're looking for poachers. And most recently, the news. A lot of stuff you see on the evening news now is being done with drones, even though they're still illegal. So we'll get more into that. I belong to the Colorado US group, and there's a Spanish company just trying to bring a drone water tanker to fight out firefighters here in the summertime. So there's just so many opportunities right now. Real estate, people want to take 3D images of houses and things. Search and rescue. So if you look all over the world right now, from Peru to Japan to Brazil, everyone's kind of getting into drones. This helicopter right on the right is the RMAX, which is the one I had. So agriculture, which is probably the top of the list of potential applications right now, that's huge. Utilities, construction. I've seen drones tracking fish off of the Oregon coast to track migration patterns. Weather, like CU Boulder is big on, the center called Recov, is doing a lot of work on hurricane chasing with drones. Anytime there's a natural disaster, a friend of mine at Texas A&M, she goes and brings her robots to wherever it is, drones and ground robots to do search and rescue. So there's just unlimited applications right now. Started in the military, and you want to avoid all of that, and now maybe move to these civil applications and science applications. Guys in the unmanned group always talk about dull, dirty, and dangerous. And that's kind of their mantra for unmanned vehicles. Has anybody read the Stephen Hawking thing recently? About AI? You read it? What do you think?
Sounded a little doom and gloom.
Yeah, so what Hawking is saying is if we mature artificial intelligence it's the end of the human race. And he's being seconded by Elon Musk saying the same thing, right? So with smart machines, could be some problems in terms of what happens next. That could be an interesting one. Law enforcement, Mesa County has a fixed-wing drone they use right now for search and rescue. USGS, NASA, they've been players for a long time. Aerosol, I think, was in Boulder, but it's an Australian company. So you need licenses, they need low-cost solutions. So this is the RMAX. So I paid $125,000 for one of these. And then this is the one I was just too scared to fly. So we did a lot of simulations, but we never got it to really fly like it should be flying. They wanted to sell me 2 of these that were autonomous for $1 million, but I didn't have that in my budget. So, and they've been using this for years to fertilizer, seeding, all kinds of stuff. And for a while, Yamaha was banned by the U.S. So Yamaha sold some of these helicopters to China, and that was against some other law they had. So they were kind of restricted for a while. So a little data point on some, work with drones. So they have the applications. So rotorcraft, so the common ones are agriculture, news, movies, real estate. So Hollywood just got a waiver to use drones for their filming. Agriculture is kind of heading in that direction. Real estate and news people, not yet, but they want to get there. Common applications is monitoring, surveillance, exploration, and mapping. And you guys have seen all these, right? It's pretty common now. In fact, the best one I've seen was the Kager quadcopter. I don't know if you've seen it, carrying a keg around. That was pretty impressive. So precision agriculture. So getting moisture to where you need it, getting pesticides to where you need it, to not to do anything over crops is a big deal. So if you look at the life cycle of agriculture, there's a lot of opportunities to incorporate drones. In fact, spraying weed killer is like one of the biggest right now. So here's imagine a person with OmniStar mapping an area, and you want maps like this. So if you did it with a drone, you can be so much quicker. Again, that's kind of dropped out, but using different sensors, you can get different things like bugs. So I don't know what happened to my title now. So a lot of potential. The biggest problem with aircraft is wind, crosswinds. So launch, recovery, wind is a problem. So when you do your design, you typically take it into consideration, crosswinds and some other things. So if I was doing a design class, we'll get into all that stuff. So sensors, you need a sensor, a camera, or whatever. If you have a small quadcopter, this means you need a small camera, but then you might not have the resolution in the camera. GPS, GPS can be spoofed, so that's a problem. You don't have, so you're gonna have to do reckoning for a while. So software equipment. And then I looked at the energy industry, and this is the life cycle of energy. And there's opportunities everywhere from pipeline inspection to flood assessment to inspecting cables. There's just a lot of opportunities right now. So 6 arguments for drones. They can definitely add to a business. You can definitely save money. It'll create jobs. If we can ever figure out the operators, how we're going to certify them or what's going to happen there. And then the privacy stuff, big issues. So if you read Tom's article, the 192 future uses for drones, he made a very good case for a ton of good applications that most of them weren't even being addressed right now. So if you want to do a feature here, I'll look at his paper. So doing business with drones. So what does that mean? Here's a UAV in the middle. There's no-fly zones. Like no-fly zones are around military facilities, around airports, no-fly zones. If you're sharing a space, how do you do collision avoidance? How do you share data? All issues. So the assumption right now is the NAS, which is the National Airspace, it's going to be first addressed by the DoD and the Department of Homeland Security. And once they break their way in, it'll open up the commercial market. So the biggest fear right now is there's going to be so many unmanned aircraft that it's going to flood the market and it'll flood the skies, and there's going to be a lot of bad press and future problems. So we know they can fly. And so right now, there's segregated airspace where the military flies across country that they can fly in and no one else can right now. But what we're looking for is this public airspace and this civil airspace. So to fly anywhere in the US, if you're not the government, you need something called a COA, Certificate of Authorization. Unfortunately, they're hard to get, and it's only granted to universities right now. So this is kind of where do you think they're going in terms of what's going to be happening in the NAS. So this cause is a lot of paperwork, basically, by the federal government, and it could take months to years to get it passed. And then you need your special airworthiness certs. So there's 545 cores right now active in the US. So that's not a lot. CU Boulder has probably 20-something of these. They're one of the few people in Colorado that have cores. So that's why you always have people flying indoors, because you don't need a core to fly indoors. But that's another problem. So flying at night is not allowed. Flying more than 400 feet above the ground is not allowed, even though you've seen them like thousands of feet up now. Flying within an airport is not allowed. And because you're line of sight, manual control, that's the only thing that's allowed right now. So automatic autonomous waypoints is still not accepted yet on the commercial side. So modern aircraft as drones. A lot of the drones you see right now started in the model aircraft industry and moving upwards. So it's kind of cheap to get into a drone, except it's not being regulated right now. The problem is, if you don't have a core, you shouldn't be flying. But no one's going to enforce the law, so you take your risk until somebody stops you, I guess. So I put together 16 commercial quadcopters that you would see on the market right now. The Bebop, the AR-2 drone, all the way up to some of these more expensive ones. So if you look at the bottom, it's $500 or a few $100 for some small quadcopters. Usually no sensor, no GPS, nothing else, to $1,000 where you can get a reasonable aircraft with a nice sensor, and then the more expensive ones, the commercial ones. So you look at the top one, but the Sky Ranger, that's $130,000 for that aircraft. But look at the left at the flight times. Nothing's over an hour, and most stuff is less than half an hour, and most stuff is even less than half an hour. So all the toys are about 10 minutes of flight time. If you spend a few $100s to a few $1,000s, you can get to like half an hour of flight time. So the biggest limitation is actually power. So the NAS is supposed to be doing something. They're a little behind, like most new technologies, and they're waiting for, the public is waiting for the government to figure out what they're going to do. So some of the guidelines right now: loss of link, what do you do? Do you fly back home? Is a pilot qualified? How high can you fly? So, but the FAA is telling, the Congress is telling FAA by September 2015, We want a law in place, and we want people to be flying commercial drones. So we're kind of like in the front of that marijuana thing, right? If you can prep now, you might be there at the right time. Because if you're trying to get to marijuana now, you're already too late.
Did you say September of 2015?
Right. And there's so many people that are unaware of things. I saw the video of this girl tackling a kid with a drone on a beach in Virginia because she was flying a drone over a public beach. She didn't like it. She tackled him. The cops arrested her. She went to jail, but he was pretty beaten up after that. And now there's other reports of people shooting down drones, because of this privacy issues that need to be addressed. So if you know about drones, then it's not as risky as you think it is. So my second to last slide. So this is the University of Virginia. And there was a guy named Perker who flew a foam fixed-wing aircraft. He was contracted by the university to take pictures of the university, of the school itself. And he got arrested and fined for flying a drone without a core. So what happened was, 2011, and Perker is a Swiss citizen. He takes pictures, he takes nice videos, he gets fined by the FAA, even though he's doing it under contract to the university. So March 2014, the judge decides the drone itself was not, the regulations was too vague by the FAA. The drone itself wasn't covered or specified, and so this fine was overturned, and so you could fly commercial drones. But a few weeks ago, NTSB reversed the ruling, saying it's not whether a drone is an aircraft or not, it's whether he was careless or reckless, and so now you can't fly in a public space. And what the FAA is saying right now is anything above the ground is theirs, and they control everything. And people are not happy with that.
Up to 60,000 feet.
No, anything above the ground, FAA is saying,
Because there's space, they don't roll space.
oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
They also technically don't roll below 400 feet.
Well, they say they do now, and so they can regulate that.
But that rule hasn't come out.
Right, exactly. It's next year, so people are kind of stuck in the middle right now.
Well, was part of the issue that he was paid for this, so you have the whole commercialization aspect?
Exactly. You can't fly commercially.
What about professional high jumpers?
I don't know.
They're getting paid for it.
Well, so last year, when we had those floods, there was a Aurora company that flew a fixed-wing aircraft over the flooded area, and then they're charged by DHS to say you stop and desist, or we're going to throw you in jail, kind of thing. So it's still a lot of unknowns. So the issue here is it evolution or revolution? Is it coming? When's it going to be here? How do we worry about the privacy stuff, the public awareness, the security, the safety? And then when is the government going to come out and do their regulatory stuff? And that's still kind of unknown right now. And then so we're kind of at this tipping point in terms of drones. So sometime in the next year or two, something's going to be happening to somebody. But it will take one disaster to ground the whole fleet. So if if you take out an aircraft, that's a problem, right? So we'll see what happens. Any questions?
So if somebody's flying a drone, do they run the risk of some FAA guy coming and stopping them?
They could.
Is it more like the local police that'll charge you?
And so that's the issue, because the police want to buy the drones too. Because they want to use it in chase, they want it for surveillance, reconnaissance.
Yeah. So some of the issues that are coming out with this are, other countries are farther ahead than we are. They've
Yes.
opened it up, so the the equivalent of FedEx in China now has flying drones operating in China.
Right.
And so they're getting more experience doing this than we are.
Yeah, so the DJI Phantom 2 drone sold by Amazon owns 72% of the market, and it's a Chinese company. The high-end stuff you saw, the Quadcopters, is a Canadian company. And then next lower tier are German companies. But everybody sees the US as the most lucrative market, so everyone's trying to come here. And because we're so far behind, the Europeans have just done all this regulatory stuff, hoping that US will catch up with them. But somehow we want to lead, so that's still an issue.
Yeah, so can we talk a little bit about what Google's doing with their drones, the Titan and Facebook's Ascenta?
They try to deliver packages, right? And they're doing it in Australia because there's no regulation.
No, the Google Titan drone is the solar powered.
Yeah, have you guys seen that? So a few years ago, DARPA had a program, I'll get back to your question, but DARPA had a program to have a drone that would fly 5 years without coming down. It'll be solar powered, it'll just stay up there. So now Google and Facebook has this idea about bringing the internet to parts of the world that don't have internet coverage. So they're going to fly these solar-powered drones to be a local, local internet for that area, and then beam it down.
Is this that like 30-foot wingspan plane covered with solar panels?
Exactly.
It's actually larger than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are,
That's got a huge.
and actually the leader in that technology is Airbus.
So this is the Titan drone here. Now this will fly at upwards of 80,000 90,000 feet in the air. That's above the weather patterns. It's above air traffic. And so this is set up to, so that it's like a low-flying satellite or a high-flying cell tower. Different ways of looking at it. But because there's no clouds up above it gets sun all the time, and with batteries, then it can stay up. Titan is saying 5 years at a time before it has to come down. We don't know what the mean time is between failure. But so Google's plan with this is to bring Wi-Fi to the other 3 billion people on the planet. So they want to create these configurations of these things that can fly non-stop for long periods of time all over the earth.
Facebook bought a company that does almost the same thing, right?
Right. So Facebook is, let's see.
Here you go.
Yeah, this is the Ascenta. This is a British company. And so these are, the way I look at it is eventually these are going to be competing directly with Comcast and Quest and Sprint and everything else that's out there, AT&T. I think it'll get real interesting real fast. But not just U.S. telecom companies, all the telecom companies all over the world, because these things can fly everywhere. So I think that gets very interesting very fast. Now, if you look at the opportunities in the drone world, there's clearly there's lots of cool stuff that's going on. There's lots of potential here. We have this awkward period here where we're waiting for the government to try to get off the dime. So this same drone that can deliver pizza to your house is the same drone that can deliver bombs or poison or spy on your kids. And so that's where all the dangers come in. Now, the security issues, while people are going to look at that as very restrictive, it also creates a lot of opportunities. So in the middle of all of this, this kind of craziness that's happening right now, we're going to see requirements for security people that are licensed to handle these drones, licensed people putting stuff on, taking them off, that sort of thing. Again, that creates lots of interesting opportunities along the way. Yeah, and along with this, though, when we start looking at, you have a drone, a quadcopter, and the article that I wrote, I started off by asking the question, if we mount a video projector on a flying drone, what capabilities does that give us? What additional things can we do with a video projector on a drone that we couldn't do otherwise? And naturally, you could fly it in a concert, you could have rather interesting special effects created by that. But then as I was scratching my head thinking about that, it occurred to me that we could have a quadcopter or a drone that flies around and puts advertising right in front of key individuals at a certain time. This has the potential to be the most annoying form of advertising. So I'm not advocating that at all, but it has that potential. The same thing, though, when you ask the question of what capabilities does it give us if we add a robotic arm to a flying drone? This drone then can suddenly pick things up and take it someplace else. Yeah. Now, we actually have the potential to eliminate forest fires completely with drones. We can have drones that are flying over with heat sensors, infrared sensors, and so forest fires are very easy to put out when they're very tiny. And so if we can have them flying over, spotting any fires that are happening up in the mountains, then before they turn into a giant blaze, then we can shoot in a fire extinguisher drone and put them out right away. That, I think, has huge potential. We should be testing that here in Colorado. And the idea is that I've actually worked on satellite command and control systems, and a lot of that technology is done at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, which is ironic because they could monitor all the forest fires from that base, and they had some of the biggest forest fires destroying the area. In fact, causing them to evacuate the Air Force Academy down there at one point. And they had the ability to spot that. So the government is actually doing some pilot programs and testing out of drones to use in forest fire detection. And for some reason, they didn't pick Colorado for those tests, which is, I think, bizarre. Lots of interesting stuff going on in here. So to give you some background of what we're doing here at the DaVinci Institute, we're developing what's called micro colleges. We have computer software courses that we're doing, 13-week courses that will take somebody who's a beginner and get them to a point of getting an entry-level job in the industry. The projections that we see is that by 2030, the average person will have to reboot their career 6 times. And people who have to reboot their career, change gears and do something else are going to want to do it in the least amount of time possible, which makes traditional colleges a very poor fit for this. So this type of training we want to spearhead. We think that micro colleges can go off in a lot of different directions. And so part of what we wanted to do is assess the level of interest in doing a course, like a 13-week course on the drone industry. Now, we still have some restrictions with the government and everything leading up to this, but the projections are that the number of jobs being created by 2025 is going to be over 100,000 jobs in the United States, just in the drone industry, in the next 10 years. With a huge number of jobs, huge number of opportunities for people to work in this space. And so this is kind of an entry point for people that want to get started in this. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the 3 ladies in the back with the DaVinci Institute staff, Jessica, Mikhail, and Tony. They're going to be handing out an assessment form so you can put an evaluation down on what you think of what you heard tonight. And also let us know if you're interested in learning more about this course that we're talking about. So we make these decisions based on kind of public response to these things. And so go ahead and hand them out. We have some of the most talented people in the country here at the DaVinci Institute. These 3 ladies are keeping us on track with everything that we're doing. I'd like to open it up for some more questions that you might have. Any questions you have?
Can you comment on the fact that a cell phone has almost every sensor besides LiDAR that a drone needs to fly?
Can you answer that?
Sure. So right now, senior design at University of Colorado, and I'm building a mine detection ground robot. And we're using a cell phone because it has a GPS, has a comm, and it has the camera that we want to use. So I'm feeding that into an Arduino, into my motors. And so we paid, except for a cell phone, everything costs $130. So I think the cell phone is great. The problem is you can't break it apart because the wires are too small and you can't. So we're just trying to pull signals off the plugs and then into our Arduino. So I can run MATLAB either on the Arduino or on the cell phone. Either one.
So I'll give you a little background on some of the things happening in the sensor world. Last year in November in Silicon Valley, they had an event called the Trillian Sensor Summit. And this was put on by Fairchild Semiconductor. Anyway, they were charged with creating a roadmap as to how long it would take before we reach 1 trillion sensors in the world. And they concluded that it would be around 2024. And that by 2036, we're going to have 100 trillion sensors in the world. So what's happening in the sensor world?
Sensors, but sensors connected to the internet, right?
Right. So what's going to be going on in the sensor world, these sensors become very cheap, very inexpensive to produce, and can produce them in mass quantity. They're going to be very tiny. And so we're going to start embedding sensors into paints and coatings, embed them in our clothing. We'll have sensors on the sides of our cars, on the sides of buildings, on the sides of bridges. So we'll be getting information from everywhere. So that this whole shift in the sensor world is going to make dramatic changes in the world around us. And so everywhere we look, put on special glasses or look at our phone, as we move around, we can get information from all these different services. Sir?
Yeah, a couple points. There is a company here locally that's making a LiDAR unit for a cell phone now. It's called Spike.
Okay.
And also, I went to a Lizard conference, and they had a Trimble fixed screen craft at Waypoint. It was about $40,000, and they're saying that right now you should be able to do it over private land. Well, that's kind of up in the air, I guess.
Okay. Other questions?
I think it's a fine line that's going to be developed from the FAA and the commercialization of drones versus the hobbyists. Because right now, this young man here is on his way to get his newest drone. I was talking to him before we started, where he's going to attack his neighborhood and God knows what. You know, these young kids. But you know, getting to the point of trying to utilize that in a hobby, but all at once you're doing somebody a favor and it's commercializing it. And you know, how far is that the law going to have to filter down because airspace is airspace?
Yeah. Okay. Is that a question you want to answer?
There isn't any regulations right now, so it's pushing from both sides, from the military side coming down and hobbyists moving upwards. So hobbyists are getting more sophisticated and smarter with better equipment. And so we'll wait for the FAA regulations to see what happens there.
So before we go on to the next question here, as an incentive for you to fill out these information forms here, we'd like, when you finish them up, put them in the basket in the back, but we're going to have a drawing. So we actually have a Kindle Fire that we're giving away. So make sure you turn those in. So that's our incentive to turn those in. The second part of the drawing is that we'll give away one of my books that I'll sign for you. So that's we're always promoting the books. So. All right, Rick.
Would you care to predict what you think the FAA is going to do? I mean, I hear lots of rumors about talking about you're going to need a commercial pilot's license. What do you get? insight? What do you think they're going to do?
It's kind of up in the air because,
No pun intended.
well, exactly. I mean, they want to control everything, but they're not going to be able to. They're not going to be able to get it passed by, through legislation, so then it's going to stall out a few more years. They had a plan 2 years ago, and they still have a plan, so it's still not going anywhere. So that's a problem. I don't know, it could go anywhere, it can go anywhere.
Okay, let's go right over here.
Kind of a two-part could you speak to us about some countries that are more, I mean, you mentioned China, I think Australia, but what are some other countries that have been more lenient with their laws? And do you see any possibility of maybe a test there for people who go and play?
Well, that's why Google's in Australia, because they can test in Australia, but they can't test here. There's a lobbying group between Amazon, Google, and Facebook, and a few of the big companies, Oracle, trying to lobby for drones in the U.S. But
Any European countries?
Europeans are actually ahead of us.
Yeah, most European countries, Germany, for example, has legislation. Austria just opened up in January.
Let me show you real quick here. There's a company that's actually delivering food right to the table of a restaurant. And I looked at this and I thought, you know, what could possibly go wrong? Chopsticks and whirling plates. I mean, and this is what he was referring to earlier.
So but if you're using a camera, you need to make sure you can stabilize the image and stabilize the platform. If you can't do either of that, then
You get a great difference.
exactly.
Is that usually done in like a post-processing? Or is that done in real time?
Does everybody know what Sparkfun is? That's one of our local success stories here. It was started by a young man, Nathan Seidel, in his dorm room at CU in Boulder. And it has grown up so that he has something like 260 employees. They're based in Gundro now, and they sell over 4,000 parts. These are all of the things you need to be an inventor. If you want Arduino boards, if you want controllers, if you want LEDs, if you want resistors, or whatever it is, that they have it all right there, and they'll send it out to you. So it's a fun place to come and visit. So if you ever get a chance to go there, meet some of the people. Very creative staff there. Yeah, let me make one last. I'll leave you with all of the prediction here. I'll make the prediction that we actually will never get to the flying car era. Most people think that flying cars are like right around the corner, and we're seeing some new entries into the flying car market recently. Actually, the first flying car was the Curtiss Air car. That was 1917. But when somebody's asking for a flying car, what they're asking for is something that the average person can afford, that the average person can get into and use a steering wheel and drive around in the sky, going over to a friend's house. That's never going to happen. What we'll do is we will circumvent the flying car completely, and we'll go to autonomous drones that we can jump into this drone, and it will take us to where we want to go. Most of the people on the road here, I would not trust them in the sky. The FAA is not going to trust them in the sky either. So anyway, I will leave you with that prediction. But is there some last minute announcements I need to make, Jessica?
I think you made them all.
Okay.
Very proud of you. Good
All
job.
right, I want to thank Mikhail, Tony, Jessica, and David. We've got some of the greatest staff in the world here at the DaVinci Institute. Thank you all for coming. And please ask us questions as we go through here. We'd love to get your feedback on this and get to know the other people in the room, some very talented people here. Thank you very much.